This episode of Where Did the Road Go is brought to you in part by our Patreons. If you want to become a patron, go to wheredidtheroadgo.com. And now our show.
Transmission start. Welcome to Where Did the Road Go? Join us as we wander off the path and explore lost history, consciousness, the paranormal, unexplained mysteries, alternative thought, and much more. We are present on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com. Now here is your host, Seriah.
Welcome to this edition of Where Did the Road Go? Tonight, it's going to be sort of a pseudo roundtable type of conversation with Jeff Ritzmann and Greg Bishop. And we have a couple of different things we're going to get into, suggested by Patreons. And they were really good ideas, so we decided to cover them. And then beyond that, there's going to be a Patreon extra segment where we deal with a couple of other Patreon questions, and that'll be up later in the week. So if you want to become a patron and get extra content, giveaways, things like that, you can do so at wheredidtheroadgo.com. There's a link for Patreon. $3 a month gets you extra content every month, and the occasional giveaway and other special things here and there. Thank you, everyone, for the support. Whether you're a Patreon or not, it does matter, and it does help keep this show going. All right, so we're just going to jump right into this. Here's my conversation with Greg and Jeff. So, welcome to the show, Greg, Jeff.
Hello.
And it's been a while.
Yes, quite a long while. You've had all kinds of other more interesting guests than me to keep the thing going. Jeff said he only listens to your show and my show right now, which was kind of cool.
Oh.
Yeah. That's pretty much it.
And Jeff, it's been a long while since I've had you on, since we did the light show.
Yeah, that has been a while.
I don't know when that is, because time's kind of weird.
Oh, yeah. Time is weird, for sure.
You're like fading out, Jeff.
I am?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's better.
I'll sit up straight.
And so tonight we're gonna toss around a question here. I think this was presented by a Patreon, and I thought this is a really good question for a show. And it's, what is wrong with paranormal research?
Ego, that's like the number one thing.
Yeah, I think that's what's wrong with most things, really, when it comes down to it.
Exactly. Yes, exactly.
Ego and greed.
Yeah. Ego, like, that's probably 90% of it. Well, probably 75% of it. Greed's like 24% of it. And actually wanting to find out what's going on and get an answer is 1% of it. Oh wait, actually no. If it's also try to get laid. I think that's also part of it too, which is a really bad way to do it.
I was gonna say.
Yeah, it's that's just doomed to failure, because most people that are involved in it are kind of weird and unstable in some way. I know I am. So you got to find something outside of the paranormal that tolerates it.
So what is actually wrong with the way the research is conducted?
Well, Jeff and I were talking about what'd you call it? The bored housewife syndrome?
Yeah. Well, that's one facet, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there is, research, that's a really loose term, isn't it, for this stuff? So,
yeah.
I think it's one of the biggest problems is that people, they have an ideology, and then they try to basically prop up their quote unquote findings around the idea or the preconceived notion that they have. And so, I guess if people would be a lot less married to theof theories,
yeah.
In other words, don't hold fast to anything, just kind of take the stuff as it comes and kind of parse it through, I guess, your own filter, because what else can you do? So yeah, that to me is one of the biggest problems. Is it's so many people want to believe a certain thing or a certain way, and when the evidence doesn't support that, they either ignore it or they bury it, and then they try to make something that this, what is it, the square peg into the round hole type of thing. And I think you've got a lot of people who, as Greg was saying, I had called it bored housewife syndrome because back in the late '80s, early '90s, I guess, uh, there seemed to be, like, at least in my neck of the woods, there seemed to be an inordinate amount of women into ufology, and these were the women who you would see on sightings, or you would see on encounters, or these were people who were actually moving around in this field and doing stuff. And I got to know more than a few of them, and it seemed like every one of them that I met, because I always try to figure out, like, who are these people as people, before I go looking at what kind of research they're doing. And what I see is, like, you see a lot of women, and I don't just relegate this to women. It's also, there are plenty of men out there in the same position. A lot of them didn't have a career per se. The children were grown. The husband was away at business a lot. So they had kind of like this empty space to fill, and they kind of filled it with this, which is great because it gives you a lot of time in order to do that. And as near as I can tell, that's one of the things that you need to become sort of a name in this field is a lot of time. And so that's what I saw was, and I called it bored housewife syndrome, but it could be bored house husband syndrome the same way, because you have the same on the opposite sex side of things. So, and these people, as near as I could tell, were not particularly versed in anything. I didn't know how else to put that other than they didn't bring anything to the table with them. There's just very little in the way of a skill set to do anything. They were basically like, I read the MUFON journal, and now I do this. So,
yeah, most of it.
It's a lot of it's a lot of people. One of the things that always aggravated me was the amount of people that you see out there pontificating on, like, visual data, which I've been doing for 30 years, and that's what I do for a living. But I see so many people try to enlarge pictures to some ridiculous amount and try to make sense out of single pixels of data, and try and tell me, don't you see that? Don't you see the head? Don't you see the head? Don't you see the eyes? And I'm like, no, I don't. What I see is, a Rorschach pattern that you're, trying to make a mountain out of a molehill, and this is nothing. And so therefore, when you call that out, you get all this resistance. So it's you can tell right then people are very married to not only their theories, but they're also married to whatever case might come their way, if that makes any sense. Like they
twisting that case into what they think it is when it comes their way.
Right. So everybody wants that to bite that big case, and I think a lot of people go into it thinking, this is it, this is the one, and rather than be disappointed in finding out it's really not what they thought, they kind of just keep it going. That's never a good thing.
Yeah, I thought of something else when you were talking. Another problem is the herding instinct. Like, you'll get an organization and they'll say, this is what we're about, and they'll have a culture of that organization, and everybody follows that culture, and then it doesn't allow for individual thought, it doesn't allow for originality, it doesn't allow for to, like Jeff said, to move with the case or the subject. It's basically just saying, this is our doctrine, and this is how we go about it, and this is what we do. And I find people I met some people in MUFON recently, and I said, so why are you still in MUFON? Seeing as what went on recently and who runs it and what may be going on with them. It's like, oh no, we're going to change it. And I was thinking, I don't think it's going to be possible for you to change it. I suggested that they break off and make their own group and just work in a small group, which is what I've been saying for a while, which is why I told Jeff I sell T-shirts that say mimic the obliqueness of the subject.
What do you want to tell people a little about what's going on with MUFON in case they're not aware?
Well, in the last year, there was a big scandal because the state director for Pennsylvania, I think, was it, John Ventry, put a rather vitriolic, racist rant up on Facebook, and quickly took it down when he realized people realized what he was saying. And Lon Stickler, who I had on my show, actually kind of made a cause out of it and said, "Did anybody notice this? What's going on here?" And that blossomed in some way, I guess you'd call it, into a bigger scandal where the international director, I think it was Harzan, came on and said, "Well, you know, what's the problem here? The hater or the people doing the hating, or something like that?" And he was basically excusing his statements. And I think I'm in the right here. If somebody says some viciously racist thing, you should point it out point out how ridiculous and how cruel it is. And they decided to downplay it, saying, "Well, it doesn't really have anything to do with the research and all that." And it's like, well, it kind of reflects on the organization, no matter what it is. So there were a lot of comments that came. He posted this thing. Harzan, I think, posted this statement a few days after this, and people immediately were like, "What? And my statement was, I didn't say anything about about Ventry. I said, when most organizations have a scandal or somebody says something like this, they immediately say, this person is not part of our organization anymore. They do not reflect our values, but no matter what you think, no matter how you feel about it, if he's your buddy or anything, if you want to save the organization, that's what you do. I mean, your organization could be a bunch of, crazy, conspiracy, right-wing, racist people. But the thing is, you don't go admitting that in public because it doesn't look good. It shouldn't either. So after that, I guess people found out that, one, he gave like thousands of dollars a month or at least a year to MUFON, and was in the inner circle, which is for people that give tons of money to MUFON. So not only was it a old boy thing, I think it was also a money thing. So this came out, and a lot of people left. State directors left and right. State directors were quitting. Some of them came back. Some never did. Nick Redfern stopped writing his column for the MUFON Journal because of it. Anyway, and then there's other things about selling the data to BAAS, the Bigelow people, or BASS, and other questions about what's being done with the data, etc. Anyway, so in light of all this, I mean, it just reinforced my square peg in the round hole of, I don't even think it's a round hole or a square peg. Just get rid of large organizations. They just don't do the subject any good because the subject is so mercurial that a large organization can't move quick enough to keep up with it. And it just basically just sits there while the thing runs around and makes fun of them. Really not makes fun of them, but it just, it does its thing, and the organization is like, we're going to study it, we're going to have the answer, and all of our resources are going to, it's like, no, it's not. You're going to grab a tiny little part of it and not let go of it like a dog with a bone. And meanwhile, the thing has run away. You're just sitting there with the bone thinking it's the whole thing. And that's my view of a large organization, and that's another problem. It's just the phenomenon is UFOs particularly are not amenable to being studied by large organizations, I don't think, unless it's a loose affiliation and the people, it's basically kind of a clearinghouse or a place where people can coordinate with each other. But I think that any group like that all of its chapters should be relatively autonomous and be able to do what they want. And now you can. I mean, people say, well, how do you get funding? It's like, well, Jesus, go and do crowdsource funding. I mean, you can do it many ways. So I think the time has come. It's past where people should be using their own resources and their own ideas and have them strengthened by being in a small group of 10 or 20 or less, and look at a problem for a while and study it very carefully and very and objectively as possible. Keep very detailed notes. And when you find out what you find out, give that to people, put it up online and say, this is what we found, what do you think? And let the field go in that way, because I think the more democratic it is, the more chance you have of coming up with something that may, get a little piece of whatever this thing is. Because as you and I, all of us here agree, it's probably not just one thing. It's probably all kinds of different things. It impinges on different parts of our experience, our culture, our mythology, our psyches, our everything. So, I think all this should be taken into account. Now I'm rambling. Your turn.
That was the Corey Good Stuff part of MUFON as well?
He was out there. He was a featured speaker last year. Him
Okay.
and David Wilcock, which I thought was it's like, wow, you're trying to improve your image and you have these guys. So this year they got Louis Elizondo and a few other people who I don't know. They're a little more respectable, I guess, than Good and Wilcock, but they're fighting with each other now anyway.
Yeah,
Good and Wilcock.
and Gaia.
Yeah, exactly. So it's just more, as Bill Hicks said, more fevered egos.
Jeff, thoughts?
Well, I mean, MUFON's been trouble for years. I mean, I think that's one of those. MUFON is always the one that kind of gets brought up to me when I say that these organizations don't last all that long. They don't have. They say, well, the longevity of MUFON has been decades, and I always point out that MUFON as a big corporate entity is not the one doing the research. The research is being done by these field investigators and state directors in certain states. So it is broken up into these smaller groups. And I have watched these smaller groups kind of fall away and then reconstitute in some other kind of form after some kind of blow up. Sometimes it's really as simple as I knew of one group at one point that I went to, and I just thought, wow, this is so much different from the Maryland group that I used to, used to go to meetings. I was never a member. I just went to the meetings, and they were extremely new agey, if I can say it that way. Not a lot in the way of critical thought going on. And I went to see Graham Bethune talk before he passed away. This has been many years ago now. And he, regaled this crowd with tales of Venusians and all this contactee stuff. And I was kind of like, this guy cannot possibly get a warm reception after this is over. But he got a standing ovation. And this was a group that basically imploded around about 6 or 8 months later because some new blood had come in and began to ask these questions. They began to ask these critical questions about the speakers that you were having and what was the leader of the group saying, a state section director. Why were you backing these people up? Don't you know this is nonsense and it's demonstrable nonsense? And basically the group fractured out and they said, we're not coming to these meetings anymore. We're going to start our own group. And then all of a sudden the group became sort of reformulated into something that was, I guess, a little better from what it was. But these groups, they're still cyclical and they still go in and out. And I think the drama that has been coming out of these state groups for years, I mean, that's always been a thing. It's always been a thing. I remember, 20 years ago that there was all sorts of dust-ups between territory and who gets what case and people fighting over cases and people not sharing information with one another, being very territorial about what they studied and where and who got to see what and all of this. I mean, it's really absurd.
Yeah.
It is ego, but it's also this. There is, I guess, for a lot of people, there is a lot of work that's put into this stuff, and I think that eventually the word credit starts to to be dredged up and who gets credit for what. And yeah, that is ego to a certain degree, but it's also, this field can tend to, um, and I don't know that this is exactly purposeful, but this is just, as I've always said, seems to be how it works. That's my favorite phrase these days. It seems to be how it works that the people who do the least, if they present better than the next guy, those are the people then that become the authoritative experts or viewed as the authoritative experts on the subject. When they're doing very little in the way of real research. And most of them haven't really done much research, if you want to get technical about it. So, and that just exacerbates the feelings of resentment, and that leads to upheaval in these groups, and that leads to fracturing of groups because one person might like investigator B and the other one doesn't, and they're very vocal about it. So that tends to make, and that schism happens over and over again. So this is why I say it just seems to be how it works. It doesn't necessarily. I can't put it down all to human psychological things. So I don't see it that way.
I wouldn't either. I totally agree with you, Jeff. It's just a dynamic, as you pointed out years ago. It's a dynamic of these kind of groups, and it's not the same dynamic as a group that would be, like bird watchers or something. Yeah, they fight and all that, but it seems to me more virulent in paranormal groups. Much more virulent.
I mean, and I think the reason being is that I'm a huge Star Wars fan, and I was in a Star Wars kind of group type thing, and that turned absolutely vicious at one point too, and the whole group again reconstituted itself into kind of something else, and now it resembles very little of what it used to be. But at the same time, I don't think that it ever got quite vicious or quite as backstabby as ufology or the paranormal in general. These ghost groups are another thing that they routinely fracture and fall apart because ideologies don't match up. They don't overlay correctly. One person interprets something one way and one sees it another. On one hand, you can put that down to how the phenomenon might present itself to one person or another. But there's also the notion of two people seeing the same but perceiving different things. And that, I think, is we could definitely attribute something like that to the way the phenomena presents. And that causes schisms of disconnect and discord, and that sows that kind of resentment. Because both people are being truthful.
Yeah. The phenomena itself. Yeah, it actively discourages any kind of standardization of study, because it's like, well, if we only do it this way, everything will be fine. It's like, no, if you do it that way, it just squeezes in and does something else.
Right.
And it's like, well, if it was run like a scientific organization, well, it can't be, because you'd have to run it like a scientific organization of a bunch of writers or artists. You have to.
Well, and I certainly like to think these days that I certainly like to think that at least the very critically minded people who follow this subject, I like to think that most of them are starting to get the idea that this stuff doesn't exactly respond to structure and scientific theorem, and it doesn't. In other words, it's not that you can't apply the scientific method to it. It just doesn't work for it, because it won't be contained inside of a structured experiment. Parapsychological labs have done some things, but we haven't been able to actively isolate a consistent hotspot for what we can only say is most definitely the UFO phenomena as we think of it. In other words, structured objects that don't seem to be from here, seem to be intelligently controlled, show up on routine, manifest from thin air, and I think until
as you said, respond individually to people, which is another huge problem.
Right. I mean, I think people are starting to get the idea, that this stuff won't it won't hold. We need to build some kind of other formula of instruction around how people would approach a case, how people would approach a sighting. Um, I think basically these days that the visual data is kind of a dead issue.
Mm.
So that, I mean, that used to be a really big thing.
Right.
And I mentioned Graham Bethune earlier. The night that I saw him speak, even here in Maryland, he had for sale a set of photographs, and again, he claimed these were taken somewhere down south, and it was of a Venusian spacecraft, and this, that, and the other. And I immediately recognized this thing, and I approached him about it. I bought a set of these pictures, and I said, I'm intimately familiar with this craft. And he said, really? Have you been visited by these things? And I said, well, yes, this is actually sitting in a warehouse in Baltimore because the company that I was part owner of in Baltimore, an event company, built it. And
He get really pissed off at you?
he didn't. He said, huh, is that right? I said, yeah, I can take you to it right now, like literally.
Yeah.
It had a ball underneath of it with blue lights on it. It's called a jet eye, Jeteye. And jet eyes are or were a really popular thing in dance clubs and whatnot, and the plexiglass segments of the. I mean, it was all there, and I said, I guarantee you, if I take this this photograph and I scan it, and I take it into Photoshop and I lighten some levels on it, I guarantee you I see lighting truss behind this one shot.
Yeah.
And he was very polite. He didn't get angry about it. He just said, well, I have to disagree with you. I said, well, again, I can take you right now. I got a key to the warehouse. I can take you right now. I can show you where it's sitting. And,
You didn't want any part of it.
right. But at the same time, when I spoke in Jersey at Pat Marcatillo's conference, um, and weirdly enough, approached me after I got done talking, and he brought me those same pictures. And I told him what the story was with these. And the heartbreak in his eyes was evident. I mean, he said, because I'll never forget the way he said it to me. He says, "You've taken away all my proof." And I said, well, it's always better to know than to believe, right? I mean,
Yeah.
you
I'm not
believe
trying
these were
to do
true.
this, turn you into a quivering wreck. I'm trying to do this to you so you don't. I'm telling you this, so somebody
Right.
else doesn't later who's not as nice as me.
Yeah, I mean, I just told him, I said, I know where this was. At that point, the business they had sold most of their inventory off, and the owner had retired, and I had moved on to another workplace. But
Should have gone and taken a picture of it so you had one with you, did you?
somewhere around here in an old photo album, I'm quite sure I've got pictures of it. I mean,
Because you know what? The nature of these things, you'll keep seeing that for years.
Yeah, yeah. Well, somewhere there's somewhere that in one of my business partner's old notebooks, he had a picture of it with Judas Priest standing in front of it.
Really? Nice.
So yeah, and people. I mean, when acts came through, sometimes they would see it and ask about it, and it would get brought out on stage for for lighting, for like accent lighting and stuff. But yeah, it's one of those things where you expect a lot of resistance from some people and you don't get it, and then other people, they just act heartbroken about it. And this is why I've always said, like, I've gone through the exact same thing as everybody else. At one point, I thought, is this extraterrestrial? Is this this? Is it that? And through the years, I would always go, well, crap. Like, seeing that and now seeing this and reading this here and getting a better understanding of some other things, like, standing on the shoulders of giants, as they say, you start to realize that, no, that's not going to work, and it doesn't fit the phenomena. So what does fit it? And eventually, I mean, at this point, I've pretty much given up all of them. And I just say, I don't have any idea what it is. I just know what surrounds and what encompasses it, and that's interesting enough for me for the time being. So
you know what fits it is non-dogmatic people with an open mind who don't have a preconception. That's what fits the subject. And that's really, really, really hard to find.
Oh yeah, tell me about it.
Because it's also not very exciting.
No, it's not, and that's the thing. That's and so much of what you see in paranormal research these days is really based around drama. It's about how much drama can a ghost investigation create, so that they can sell their DVD at the next conference.
I think there's actually plenty of groups that aren't doing that, but you never hear about them because they're not.
Well, of course not. No.
But yeah, they're the ones you hear about. This is the problem with a lot of things, that the person that screams the loudest is the one that represents everybody, even though they don't want them to.
Right. Well, and frankly, respectable groups doing interesting things as far as research goes, trying different things. They don't really want anything to do with with the mainstream field.
No,
and rightly so. So, I mean, there's that. So, I mean, and frankly, a lot of those people are starting to publish on like academia.edu, and you'll see some papers float around here and there. They're not always the best written things, but at least it looks like people are trying some new things. So
yeah, it seems to be centered around fooling yourself and whatever the phenomenon does into reacting in a way that you can see, instead of sitting there and waiting for it. But maybe more fooling yourself into not expecting anything, or fooling yourself into not, I don't know exactly how to put this, but in a frame of mind whereby you're not forcing things into a preconception. But the thing is, trying to do research and not having a preconception, there's an koan for you.
Right. Yeah. That's. I mean, because somebody would say to you, "Well, what the hell are you here for then? What are you looking for?" And I think one of the
maybe the phenomenon should lead you then by whatever happens.
Yeah, I mean, I watched. I used to watch Ghost Hunters quite a lot, and one night that they were on there, and God, I can't remember. I want to say Dustin was the guy's name. He's a young guy, or looked a lot younger than he was. But at one point, he's in a house, and they're doing this investigation, and all of a sudden, he kind of gets this look on his face, and he says to the girl that he was investigating with, "Do you ever wonder what we're doing?" And she says, "What do you mean?" He said, "What exactly what are we looking for? Are we looking for life after death? Are we looking for proof of an afterlife? Are we looking for spirits of the departed? What is it that we are actually, what are we doing this for? What are we in search of?" I don't remember what her answer was, but I thought, wow, that's a really provocative question to throw out there, and it's as close as that show ever came in my mind to, every week it was the same. It was the same schedule.
Yeah.
Go to the house, set up cameras, freak out with bumps in the night, and try and get some EVPs, and then present it to them. And every week they got something.
Of course they did.
Early on, it wasn't like that. Early on, it was spotty. But after a while, as things got more, I think the demand came, you got to come up with something. And so I always said, okay, we get it, guys. Like, there's weird stuff happening in houses that people are reporting, and you're catching something. Okay, so what's next?
Yeah.
And we never got there. Nobody ever came to the table and said, what are we doing with this? Like, what does all this stuff seem to tell us? That never happened. And I think that's why a lot of these shows, like a lot of podcasts, like a lot of, YouTube channels, they tend to stagnate because they just become the same beat all the time. Yeah. And nothing moves forward because, that's what these people are after. They're after the FaceTime. They're after the novelty of it. But I don't think a lot of them are really interested in going, what are we here for? What are we looking for? What is all this about?
That's the most important question of all when you start doing this, is what is your motivation? What do you think you're looking for? Why are you even doing this? I think that's way more important than whatever you're trying to find out. Because if you don't know what you're looking for with this kind of weird stuff, if you don't know what your motivation is, It's kind of like going into the Israel Lagarde thing about going into the Golden Dawn. Of like, you better go through a system of heavy psychotherapy before you even go into this, so you know why you're doing it. You might not even want to after you find out what are your motivation. So I think more than anything else, your motivation becomes really apparent to a lot of people except you when you start doing this, especially people that are outside of the outside of the field. When they see you doing what you're doing, they'll put you in a category, and probably you fit in that category.
Right.
But the most important thing, I mean, I guess it goes back to ego, I guess, but I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah, if you get involved in the paranormal, you better know why you're doing it and what you expect to do with it. Or, conversely, I think the best attitude is, let's see what happens if we stay interested in a certain way for a certain while, and then if nothing happens, throw that out. Or if your group doesn't find anything or does find something, immediately throw that out. Tell everybody what you did and move on to something else. I think, to me, for some reason, I think that's the best way to do things. Like I said, mimic the obliqueness of the subject. Be as mercurial as the subject, yet vigilant and as analytical as you can be.
Yeah, and I think the other thing to realize in that going in that direction and laying that framework down and saying this is how we're going to proceed forward. I think the thing that I hope that people will come to, and it certainly is something that I've come to over the years, is that just when you think you've got a thumbtack to tie that string to pull that string to the next thumbtack point, the thumbtack's gone.
Yeah.
And so you wind up chasing your tail from one thing to the next, and after a while that gets tiresome and can drive one mad. And a lot of people do quit in disgust of that. Even if they do keep to themselves into a small group and do that, those things still, at some point you have to realize that you're being led around by the nose. And whatever this is, it tends to want to do that. Both from both sides. In other words, from our side, we become addicted to what is it and the mystery of it, and the I have to know. And of course, the ego of I'm going to be the one that grabs the brass ring. I'm going to be the one that solves this.
Yeah, there's all these different motivations that has nothing to do with the problem itself or why you're doing it. Anything like that, and that's where that lives. It lives in that psychological, emotional storm that you don't even see that you're inside of, and it's just sitting there. I don't know what enough of a sign agency to it. But that's what, I mean, it's sort of referencing your trickster thing. It just lives in that chaos, in that what's the word? That brass ring grabbing area.
Yeah. And the other half of it to me is always going to be
like a parrot.
It's going to be realizing that it changes and morphs into different. It will lead you in different ways to different things, but at the same time, it's important kind of not to get disgusted as you go through this on your own, because that's really the only way that anybody's going to do it. Is to kind of go through that journey on your own, because it is a very personal thing if you have an experience of one kind or another. So there's that part, but there's also the notion of that, you can't be married to these theories, but as you are pulled through them, you are learning things. This is the important thing to realize is, what Valet asked so many years ago, what is it doing? It's science. It's saying, oh, you think you know so much? Do you really think you know? Well, what about this? Zook, and there's this weird thing nobody can explain. So you're learning to problem solve. You're learning to explore different areas of perception, of life, and you're meeting different people. You're meeting people you probably never would have encountered in daily life by going to these conferences and and of course, reaching that point where conferences don't do anything for you anymore, and then then you become, a 51-year-old embittered man who, it's
I think
no, I
Seriah
kid.
went to sleep. I think we're doing your whole show for you.
No,
Yeah.
Oh, there you are.
I'm here.
No, it's like you're like Vin Scully. You know when something's going on, you know when to just say, let's let this happen.
Well, yeah.
So people are learning something, and I think that's valuable. But of course, we're talking about the paranormal in an age right now, or a time right now, where everything is like anti-intellectual, and people very much disregard experience and expertise and education. And
They
I
mistrust
see that.
it. They
I
mistrust
see
it.
that
They're not
all
hearing
the time
so.
in the paranormal, all
Yeah.
the time.
I'm not
people,
hearing. That's been emboldened. If I'm not hearing what I want to hear, you must be. I wrote an article or something online, and somebody wrote to me, or at least wrote they wrote to me and said, I know your type with all your complicated ideas and your special words trying to confuse people. And I I'm trying to make things less complicated by trying to put it into words. So
yeah.
I created a T-shirt that says, "Caution, I use special words."
I think you should put, and I also wear
And it's
complicated shoes on the back of that.
Huh?
I said, I think on the back of that shirt you should say, and I also wear complicated shoes. But yeah, I mean, like people, the idea of expertise or experience and all that. I don't think it's ever. I don't think higher education in a specialized field like imaging or like biology or mineralogy or whatever you want to take in college and get a master's degree in. When you walk into these discussion groups and you start talking about, I'm able to actually read that chart on that implant that was extracted, and I can tell you from looking at that it's very common to see these elements in here. This is not a big deal. And by and large, what you see in the rest of this chart is that it's basically body fragments, and there's nothing amazing about this. I'm not saying, because again, if people are shown that very complicated graph and told this indicates an alien implant, that's what they want to believe, and so therefore they hold fast to that. And when someone comes in and says, well, I actually, this is what I do for a living, and I can tell you that's inherently not what you're seeing here. From my view, I'm seeing things that are just body fragments and enough iron that would be garnered from eating Fruit Loops every day for a year.
And you hasten to say, in this case, with this thing that you're showing me right now, but for some reason people say, no, that's how you feel about everything that we would bring to you.
Right. Yeah,
You
immediately get labeled, a debunker or a government agent or whatever.
Yeah, I have to say this at the beginning of lectures, say, look, I am on your side. Don't think I'm coming in here trying to tell you that all of this is BS, because I don't think it is. I think a lot of it is, but I'm trying to separate the signal from the noise for myself. And there's a lot of noise, in my opinion. But look, I think there is something that's not us that interacts with us occasionally. I really do think that, until I get some sort of something that'll change my mind. Past that, I don't know what. And usually that keeps people from getting nasty with me at the end of the lecture and asking me, ask me the same question 5 times till they hear the answer they want.
Yeah.
But yeah, just like, look, I'm on your side. It's not, I'm trying to figure this out from a different angle. This is my take on it, and your take may be different. So if I say something that upsets you, I don't know, I guess I'm sorry, but this is my point of view. But I'm not out here to tell you you're all full of crap and you're just barking up the wrong tree and you're all stupid. It's like, no, I don't think that. We're all interested in different ways. This is the way I'm interested. If you got another one or a better one, write something and come up and present at one of these things. I'd love to see it. So that usually makes everybody like, oh, okay. I may hate what he's saying, but at least he's not here trying to. He hasn't been let in. You know, somebody didn't check him at the gate, and suddenly, you know, this horrible person got let in, which is what happened.
Right.
Yeah, you know, who's slipping up at the gate there? They let this horrible person in that doesn't is not in the proper church or whatever.
Right. Well, meanwhile, you're actually the pilgrim in an unholy land, right? So that's how that kind of works. But you know, I always go back to, I don't know, 5-6 years ago, I guess it's probably been. I go to this little group meeting, and somebody says, "So, you know, what's your deal?" And I explain what I've been doing for, you know, the past 3 decades, and looking at film and photographs and videotape and all matter of visual data has kind of been what I've been able to contribute by and large, to all this. And one lady piped up and said, "Well, you know, what have you found over the years, and what cases have you worked on?" And I mentioned a couple that I'd done, and I said, but out of, you know, probably in the thousands of stuff that I've looked at, I said I've probably found a handful that I think are truly interesting and may actually represent this phenomena.
Yeah.
And she became incensed. And she said, "I find that incredulous." And I was like, "Well,
Incredulous?
I'm sorry that you find that so incredulous, but," I said, "you know,
I'm incredulous.
that's just the fact." She said, "Well, how many are we talking about here when we say a handful?" I said, out of like, just say out of 100, maybe 2, out of thousands, maybe a dozen. I said, that's probably around the number I'm talking about. And she's, you know, she just exploded with this. "I find that to be absurd," and blah blah blah. And somebody else at the table put her hand on this woman's arm and said, "I'm sure he's not talking about your case." I was like, "Oh, well, there it is. There it is." And we're having a hell of a lightning storm here. So if anybody hears rumbling on my end, that's what it is. It's thunder. But yeah, that was the response that came back. "I'm sure he's not talking about your case." And I'm like, well, I probably am, in all likelihood. I probably am talking about a case very similar to whatever you're looking at. And that's what you get. You get that sort of pushback because somebody has put a lot of time or effort and belief into a witness, a case, a photograph, and you are the one that comes in and says, "Well, maybe not so much," you know. And in the end, what you get, and then we talk about how visceral the response is to that, and I think this is what can be forgotten a lot of times. When you're an experiencer and you see these things, this becomes something that you know. I know that there is something to this stuff based on what I've seen and what I've experienced in my life. I know this stuff happens. I don't know what it is, but I know that it is quote unquote real.
Yeah.
Whatever that means.
Your anchor is a personal experience. Yeah.
I cannot expect someone who has not had that experience to consider it real. I don't ever impose that kind of indignation at people because they don't get it. The burden of proof is always going to be on the people that report this stuff and all of that. All of that said, when it comes right down to it, this, for many people in this field, UFOs, ghosts, the paranormal in general, is an article of faith. And there's another thing that's called an article of faith. And we all know what that word is, religion. And you will get much the same response if you were to walk into a Baptist or Catholic church and say, "There is no God. You guys are fooling yourselves. You're down here on your knees and you're giving money to this man who says he's giving it to charity. He's probably not. The church has done horrible things over the course." I mean, what does this sound like? This sounds like how skeptics approached the UFO thing.
Yeah.
And so you're actually attacking. They feel you're attacking their faith, and I think that if there's something to be done on our end of things, I think it's that we need to take a lot more care in how we voice our dissent with these things. If you think critically about this stuff and you see something that doesn't look right, just don't be a jackass about it. And don't get feeling all haughty and superior about it, because that's not going to get anybody anywhere.
Yeah, I've got skeptical people I know, and I keep telling them, look, if you want these people to actually listen to you, don't call them stupid right out of the gate.
Right.
Yeah.
If you did that to me, I would hate you too.
Right.
Quietly. But personal message or personal communication or phone call, say, look, have you considered this? That's all you have to do.
But a lot of that stuff is about ego as well.
Yeah. Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Some people, precious few people you can get to. But the ones that you can, if you treat them with respect and kindly, maybe they'll listen to you and a breakthrough can be made. Not by embarrassing somebody publicly. That doesn't work. That makes you fight. That makes them fight against you harder.
Yeah, exactly.
Even online, like in an online forum or something, there's a bunch of people watching. So what happens when you get attacked? You go into fight or flight mode online, and you start fighting back viciously instead of listening to the person who might have a good point. That person's just saying, "What's wrong with you? Don't you get it?" God, that's the worst phrase. I want to punch anybody that says, "Don't you get it?" What do you mean? Don't I get your godlike, view of reality? No, I don't. But the point is, like I said, the best phrase you could bring to somebody that has a certain belief system is say, like, look, here's a very strong point. Have you considered this? Take a look at it and then get back to me and we'll talk about it a little bit. Not what's wrong with you, you idiot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Once you make someone defensive, that's it.
Right, exactly. That big door just closes. You'll never get through to them at all. And all you're doing is making yourself feel superior, which is what I think a lot of so-called skeptics or debunkers, I think that's a dumb word. Well, it is. It's dumb in the way that ufologists use it. I mean, there's bunk, it should be debunked. But the skeptics are there to make themselves feel, it's like, well, we know and they don't, and they're such silly people and they never learned and the education system sucks. And it's like, well, you can bypass all that by being nice and personal and helpful with somebody and see if that works. If that doesn't work, then forget it. They're hopeless.
Yeah.
And just because you're nice to someone doesn't mean they're going to believe you.
No, but you got a lot of better chance than calling them stupid right out of the gate.
Right. You have a better chance at a conversation.
That too. I mean, I've had great conversations with people and they don't, and it starts out like, actually, I don't really like what you're saying here, but could you please explain yourself to me? I really want to hear how you came to that opinion. And sometimes it's, like, you can tear it apart immediately. Like, oh, dude, come on. Other times it's like the person has put a lot of thought into it and you really have to think about, I don't agree with your opinion, but you put a lot of thought into it. So maybe we have more to talk about. But this is rare. This is extremely rare that somebody's going to talk about something in a civilized manner, as Jeff points out, especially with the paranormal.
And what about Bigfoot?
Yeah, how about that?
That Bigfoot, huh?
Where's Tim Renner? Is Tim Renner here? Get Tim Renner in the building.
But you see a lot of the same stuff going on there, and we don't know if we're looking at a natural animal or if there's something paranormal going on.
Well, it doesn't have to be. Or Weatherly was on and he said maybe it's an animal that can do these things.
Mm-hmm. Or maybe there's an animal. Maybe there's an animal that's being mimicked by the phenomenon. Yeah,
that, or it's some sort of quasi-physical entity or a physical entity that knows how to slip in and out of. This sounds very what basis is there of this, but can slip in and out of our awareness or reality or whatever, like we go through a doorway or walk behind some trees or whatever. It just knows how to do it. just naturally without even thinking about it. I want to go over there, and I don't want to be here, and suddenly it's just not there.
Well, Seriah, for speaking as somebody who really isn't in touch with that area of anything when it comes to Bigfoot or the Sasquatch or the Yeti or any of these things, you are more connected to that than I. So let me ask you this:
Or me.
do you find personalities in the Bigfoot field that, well, let's just put it this way, that you wouldn't turn your back on these people? You wouldn't send them to the corner store for milk? Do you find these same kind of people? Do you find hoaxes in the Sasquatch world like
Of
you do?
course you do.
Oh, okay. Do you find that people are exposed to this at one point and then become ultimately obsessed with it?
Yep.
Then it's kind of like it's kind of like one of those things to me where if you find all these similar traits in this, and it kind of seems to work the same way, then maybe we need to stop looking for some animal, because I'm thinking, man, it sure seems likely that we would have found something by now.
Yeah.
And it just hasn't happened. So I kind of tend to go the way of this is a specter of some kind that, this manifests. And I was telling Greg last night, I wake up periodically in the middle of the night listening to I literally had just started listening to Tim Renner's show like last week. I listened to one episode of it, and something got said in there where I thought, okay, so what if enough people believe in a Bigfoot creature, and it becomes something that everybody has a very strong belief in, and some people are driven to obsessive lengths to go study this and spend time in the woods and throw themselves out of routine and throw themselves into, financial straits and stress and all. And so what if all of that has exactly the same effect as in other forms of the paranormal, where these things bloom and manifest out of that belief or out of that contention with so many people in a specific area, and this is where these things happen. Are we making Bigfoot sightings? Are we conjuring Bigfoot? There's a good title for a book, Conjuring Bigfoot. That's copyright me. So, it's like, is that what's going on? I mean, and I have no idea because I'm not even remotely in that world. But it's if you find these like traits, then it seems to me like that's something to look at and say, okay, well, where does that lead you if you go down that path? I don't know how Bigfoot research has progressed over the years, but I do know there's been some weird hair found in certain spots, and so there seems to be this tangible bits there that you can get your hands on, which is kind of interesting.
But it's also like the UFO world, where you have landing marks from UFOs or circles. You get prints from these things that are hard to disprove, but they don't actually prove anything either.
Yeah, they're anti-evidence. That's that's everything from the Roswell slides to Bigfoot prints to any more, any kind of video that one would shoot of a ghost or
that you cannot produce on demand.
Right.
Yeah. Well, the case that always comes to mind, there was a case where a UFO came down on the family farm and it left a white circle in the woods, broke a bunch of the trees, and the woman touched the white circle and she lost all feeling in her arm permanently.
Yeah. Yep.
And it's like, okay, well, there's no normal things that we can say about this. This isn't something that just happens, but it also doesn't prove anything about what it was.
Right.
No, just prove there was something there. The other thing is when you're looking at these things, it's almost like Jeff pointed out earlier, it's almost like an article of faith, but then you get these things, and it's like, I think I'm like venturing into Diana Pasulka territory here, where you get into a thing where these things become almost, they're articles of faith. They're like having a saint's bone or something.
That's a relic, yeah.
Yeah, it's a relic. It's a relic that represents your belief or faith in this thing, and they're treated as such. I mean, I've actually collected little bits of things from different places, and I hold them in some reverence. But like a stone from the beach at Shag Harbor, and a piece of masonry from the well where they supposedly threw the Aurora, flying saucer down when it crashed in Aurora or whatever. I have these things, and they're like little pilgrimage things, like as if a Catholic had a medal or like I said, or they build a reliquary around saints' bones or something like this. It is a tangible piece of an article of faith, and I think this is going on a lot with this kind of evidence, this physical evidence. It's almost treated like, by the rank and file, it's almost treated like holy object. I mean, I know I do.
Well, it's held the same way as well. I mean, how many times has the Catholic Church been approached about, and I don't know the names for these relics, but there is a vial of blood that liquefies on a certain day of the year that in Spain or France or something. There's a piece of the Holy Cross. There's nails from the Spear of Destiny. All these things, like, people have wanted, science has wanted to carbon date, to analyze, and the church won't allow it.
Right.
And when you get into ufology and you find these ejected pieces of molten metal, or you find these pieces of alleged crash debris and all that, these things are held and skirted away by their owners, never to be really looked at. I go to, I mean, as nice a guy as I hear he was, I watched Lloyd Pye for years have carbon, all sorts of tests done on the Star Child skull, and I watched him get, it's human, it's human, it's human, it's human, and go from one to the other until he got to that one that said, yeah, there's something very unusual here. See, there's something unusual here. Yeah. I mean, I remember that vividly. I couldn't give you dates on any of this stuff, but I remember that vividly. I'm thinking
the same thing.
This is just going place to place to get the answer that you want. And that, these things are basically passed around amongst a very tight and exclusive bunch that really never puts this thing forward into the mainstream scientific community that could really, like, do this in 4 different locations with independent people and really get to the bottom of what these things are. And isn't that what we want? But you find out it's not what they want.
The TTSA and some others are running around, they have been for years, saying, if you've got any pieces of these things, we will have them analyzed. And the reason they're having them analyzed is, I think, because, well, it's not just my opinion. I think they've actually said it. Because they want to see if it's exploitable in some way, in a way that would be useful to developing a thing that's useful.
Now, who said this?
Treating them so much as an article of faith, but as data.
Now, who is this?
TTSA, and I would suspect other groups running around trying to ask UFO researchers, look, if you got a piece of something that fell off a UFO or whatever, let us look at it. We'll give it back. We'll sign a thing saying we'll give it back, and it'll be notarized and all that. But we need to get a piece of it so we can analyze it and find out what this is, if it's real or not or whatever. And what they're trying to do, and they've said this outright, is maybe we can find something on here that's exploitable as technology.
Mm-hmm. But here's the question, Greg: if you had something, would you give it to them to look at?
I don't know.
I wouldn't. I wouldn't.
It like a lot of other things that where people gave stuff to some authority, they never saw it again.
Right. Well, that's one thing, but
they're saying that they will, and it's totally open and all that. And I don't know, because I don't know anybody that has given them anything to take a look at.
Right.
I would hope that you can trust them. I have no idea.
Yeah.
But it's a lot easier to make a stink about things than they used to be.
Yeah, that is true.
There's a lot more eyes on you if you start screwing with people. It's like, look, we signed this, we all signed this, and now they say they don't have it, they won't give it back to me, so what the hell's going on? And I don't think they want any bad publicity. So, I don't know.
Yeah, you could be right. I mean, for me, I would say, I think I'm going to go with, an independent lab somewhere, and and again, the problem where when we talk, here's another problem, Seriah, going back to the main point. The money, the funding, it's
Yeah.
horrible. It's horrible.
Mhm.
You can't get funding to do much of anything in this field. I mean, I was astounded that I walked away with enough money to get cameras to lay out in here to go live and have people monitor them. I was astounded that that happened. But at the same time, if you want to, you have a piece of something that you think is very odd, uh, and you want to have it looked at by an independent lab, that's a lot of money. And are people really going to pony up the cash to see if what you have is really something anomalous? And I
Yeah,
think
because they
history
give you money.
history
If the
shows no.
yeah, answer they want, they'll get pissed.
Right.
Yeah.
And this from a field that when you're talking about the subject as a whole, far more money has been spent in simulating UFO things for TV and film than has ever been put forth in studying it from a scientific standpoint. If you want to get to that granular level,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
never happened. It's so lopsided, it's crazy.
Yeah.
Whereas look at law enforcement. Law enforcement shows are a lot of money, but there's far more money spent in real law enforcement than there ever has been in TV shows about law enforcement.
Yeah.
This is the only field where this seems to hold. So that too is a really interesting thing. People see this as marginal. It's marginal. It's not all that important. The people who are passionate about it are passionate about it, but unfortunately, a lot of them are broke.
Yeah.
And
Rich people don't find pieces of UFOs.
right, right.
So I totally forgot what I was going to say. We're almost out of time, actually.
Well, that's what editing's for.
I don't tend to edit much, honestly.
Really?
I
Shit
like
out
the natural
there, but I
flow.
sound like an idiot.
I don't know. Any final thoughts on this stuff?
Uh, wow.
Don't get involved if you got an expectation of an answer.
That's a good one, actually.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. And I the only thing I would say would be not to and along those same lines, I would say don't get married to any one theory, and start doing things in much different ways than what MUFON has told you to do, or even I've told you to do. I mean, right down to little me to big MUFON, like just do your own thing and try and
Yeah.
be as open and broad as possible. But look at these people who are having these experiences. That's where you're going to find something interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
The phenomena isn't going to provide it. It's just going to keep tantalizing.
Yeah.
Uh,
Somebody I respect told me the answer can come from anywhere. So that's
mm,
that's a really good thing to keep in mind.
mm,
If you have a motivation and you're reasonably, circumspect about what you're doing, I think you got just as good of a chance in a lot of ways as the TTSA people
mm. Oh yeah.
in making some sort of a step or a breakthrough, at least for yourself, which is like the most important one.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, if it doesn't interest you or you're not getting something out of it yourself, answering your own question, if this is part of your journey, then like more power to you. But if you got a destination in mind for this, then you probably should stop.
Oh, and by the way, if anybody listening finds out or discovers something really amazing, chances are no one will care.
And why is that?
Just throwing that out there.
I know exactly what he's saying.
Because they won't. Because it's one of those things where I think people see the phenomena, any of these phenomena, to be very. I think they look at it in a very pedestrian way, very simplistic way. It's either real or it isn't. It's either this or it's that. And when you start to dig down into your own into your own interests or your own targets with this stuff, it tends to get very complicated very quickly.
Yeah.
And then you discover some kernel way down there, and you've got to backtrack through everything that got you to that point. And people just don't find that to be interesting. They just want to know what's the end game. But the problem is that where you arrive at, that you find something interesting, you are not only compelled to tell them the entire story of how you got there, but you have to show them how this is how I arrived here. So what's this, or
Otherwise,
what's
it
that?
doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. The things are so interconnected
Mm-hmm.
and so tied to one another that unless you step through it, they will not understand what you're excited about.
Yeah, exactly.
Does that make sense?
You have to have the patience to listen to that, because if it happened to them, they would have to go through the same thing of explaining, because it would not be really
Right.
that similar to yours. You might have come to the same conclusion, but you would no way have gotten to it the same way.
Yeah, and chances are where you walked to get to that point is so dry and maybe even to an academic dryness that people don't find it interesting.
Yeah, but
They
it's
want the
That's true,
epiphany.
important.
All right. Greg, where can people find you?
Probably at Radio Mysterioso, my cast, which is not on every week. I don't keep to a schedule anymore. I stopped that a few months ago. I just have somebody on when I think it's a good time, and which is no way to build an audience. Because I'll put up an interview when I feel like it, and I think it's like, well, this would be a good one. I'm not like desperately trying to find somebody for the next week like I used to. I just realized that that's not the way I do things. So I try to keep it like the show is a very personal journey, and the fact that anybody listens to it is amazing and makes me very happy. So yeah, if you go to Radio Mysterioso and you want to listen to any of those things, I will be eternally grateful, especially if you react and say something.
All right. Jeff, is there anywhere people can find you?
No. I don't know, Twitter.
Well, what was that? Twitter?
Yeah, just look me up on Twitter. I'm kind of done with Facebook.
I've noticed you pop on and off there.
Yeah, and I'm only popping on and off because I got a business page there, so that's really it.
Yeah.
But there's the Twitter feed, which I don't really. Surprisingly enough, I don't do a lot of paranormal stuff these days because I'm writing the book still, and I'm about 3/4 of the way through. And again, this is a book that probably no one's going to buy or read. It's just I really need to get this done, and the problem is that I keep listening to your goddamn show, which puts more stuff in my head, which means I got to write more pages. So thanks for that.
You're welcome.
And thanks for Tim Renner as well. So it's just these little loose ends I'm trying to tie up, and then I got to start organizing this book into some kind of progressive, thing that makes sense for people to read. So
Now, this is the book. This is the book about your experiences.
No, I mean, I've got like one chapter in the beginning where I talk about some of that stuff, but then I start going into more along the lines of, and I guess really one of the overarching thematics in this book is that if you have these experiences and you're looking for some form of and I'm not just saying support, you'll get support, but if you want real direction and help, it's not here. And so I'm hoping that if someone is out there having some scary things happening and they're not altogether comfortable with it like I was, that they'll read this and maybe go, okay, there are things that I can do if I don't want this in my life. There are things that I can do to maybe squelch this down a bit while still being somewhat intrigued and interested in it. So there's nothing wrong with that, but that took me the better part of 12, 15 years to kind of get to that stage. And so this book kind of says, here's what happened to me in the beginning, but then it kind of goes on into everything from seeing the paranormal, seeing its footprints, not only in the paranormal stages of interest, but also well outside of those interests in places that you would never in a million years think that it is, but it be, and it's very much there, and I describe it in some detail, which I think people will find very interesting. So
Cool.
I'm having a great time writing it, but it's kind of at this point where I got to start winding it up because it's I covered a lot, but hopefully I can now arrange it into something that people will be propelled through it rather than kind of getting hung up on one chapter or another.
Nice. All right. Well, thank both of you.
Thank you, sir.
Oh, thanks so much. It's fun as always. Always a fun show and discussion.
And a special thanks to all of my Patreons, and particularly those pledging $10 or more for the extra support: Super Inframan, Andy McNamara, William Lovelace, Mark Brady, Allison Cook, Craig Cisneros, Donna Beveridge, Sasha Lorg, Christopher Vaughn, Robert Groom, Scott Morris Everett, Chris Elmquist, Russell Wilcoxon, Patricia Giaquinta, Matthias Sumby, and John Eddy. Thank you all so much. All right, I hope you enjoyed that conversation. Again, there's another, I think it's about 40 minutes worth of a Patreon show with Jeff and Greg dealing with just a couple of questions from the AMA session on Patreon. So, yeah, it's I hope you're going to like that as well. That's about all for this week. We'll see you next time. You have been listening to Where Did the Road Go? This show is made possible in part from our Patreons, and we thank you and everyone listening for helping us continue this exploration of the strange. You can always find everything Where Did the Road Go related at www.wheredidtheroadgo.com. And thank you so much for your support.